1. Who's really running American defense policy? The Trump administration's chaotic approach. 2. Ukraine under fire. Pentagon cuts air defense as Russian drone attacks surge. 3. Trump sending more weapons to Ukraine after aid pause. U.S. military aid update. 1. Who's really running American defense policy? The Trump administration's chaotic approach. #### Who's in charge of American defense policy? In this edition of the Atlantic Daily, we delve into the pressing matters of the day, offering insights into significant stories and cultural recommendations. If you haven't subscribed yet, you can do so here. https://www.theatlantic.com/newsletters/sign-up/Atlantic-daily. Have you ever considered the implications of the United States engaging in military action against a nation with a population of around 90 million by deploying B-2 bombers? If this moment has escaped your memory, you're not alone. It occurred over 2 weeks ago, and many have likely been preoccupied with more recent developments. In fact, the latest news reveals that the U.S. has suspended certain arms shipments to Ukraine, even as Russian forces intensify their bombardment of Ukrainian cities, continuing their brutal campaign. Just last Thursday, Donald Trump attempted to reach out to his ally, Russian President Vladimir Putin, but it seems his efforts were in vain. "I didn't make any progress with him today at all," Trump remarked to reporters before boarding Air Force One. In another surprising turn, the president has opted to reassess AUKUS, the security agreement established in 2021 between the United States, Australia, and the United Kingdom. This unexpected decision has left U.S. diplomats, as well as their counterparts in Canberra and London, feeling unsettled about the future of this alliance. Interestingly, it wasn't Trump himself who initiated this review. It was his chosen Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. However, it appears that the real impetus came from a lesser-known figure, Undersecretary of Defense for Policy Elbridge Colby, a longtime Washington insider who took it upon himself to start this process. But wait, there's more. Recent reports from CNN indicate that North Korea is contemplating sending an additional 30,000 troops to support Russia in its ongoing military endeavors. While this information is primarily based on a single intelligence source, it's worth noting that North Korea has already dispatched at least 10,000 soldiers to the European front over the past 9 months. Given the dire situation for Russian conscripts, it's plausible that a deal is in the works to provide the Kremlin with more foreign troops. This situation prompts a critical question: who is truly steering the ship of American foreign and defense policy? The answer is not straightforward. It certainly isn't President Trump, who has shown a rather erratic interest in foreign affairs, often abandoning issues that seem to be losing causes. He once claimed he could resolve the conflict in Ukraine in a single day, but after acknowledging the complexities involved in achieving peace, he has since retreated from that promise. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, also appears to wield little influence in this administration. Hegseth, on the other hand, seems more focused on discussing topics like lethality and transgender issues rather than providing substantial briefings. His performances often come off as sycophantic rather than informative. In fact, Hegseth's comments can seem almost tame compared to those of State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce, who has been known to express her gratitude for Trump from the podium, claiming he is saving this country and the world. Interestingly, the National Security Advisor role also falls to Rubio, which adds another layer of confusion to the leadership structure. It appears that the real architects of American defense policy are individuals like Elbridge Colby, and perhaps a few others operating within the Washington, D.C. area. Their influence is often subtle and not immediately apparent. For instance, while the order to halt arms shipments came from Hegseth, the original concept was reportedly driven by Colby, who has long advocated for reducing U.S. involvement in Ukraine and reallocating resources to counter China in the Pacific. However, analyses suggest that this perspective may be misguided, as the needs of Ukraine do not align with a binary choice between supporting them or focusing on the Pacific. In this administration, many key figures seem either incompetent or disconnected from the actual policymaking process, leading to decisions being made at lower levels without adequate oversight. During Trump's first term, this dysfunction was somewhat mitigated by the presence of career professionals who knew how to maintain operations. However, in his second term, many of these experienced individuals have been sidelined or replaced by loyalists lacking the necessary expertise. Ironically, this shift empowers the very appointees that the MAGA movement often criticizes in other administrations. The policymaking process in the Trump White House resembles that of authoritarian regimes, where the upper echelons focus on a few major initiatives while delegating everything else to lower-level officials. This allows individuals like Colby to pursue their own agendas, while others merely do enough to avoid drawing attention. In this chaotic environment, it often seems that Trump is the only one truly in charge, which results in a lack of coherent leadership on many issues. Currently, the administration is fixated on two primary issues: irrational tariffs and harsh immigration policies. While these have international implications, they are primarily viewed through a domestic political lens. Other significant matters, such as relations with Pakistan and India, nuclear weapons, and the ongoing war in Ukraine, receive only fleeting attention from Trump, who evaluates their relevance based on personal gain before moving on. Even the recent military strike against Iran, a pivotal action for the U.S., seems to have lost its significance for Trump. He claimed that Iran's nuclear capabilities were obliterated, but conflicting reports from defense and intelligence agencies suggest uncertainty about the actual damage. Despite Israel's gratitude, Trump quickly shifted his focus elsewhere, likely due to the lack of political capital gained from the strikes, as public opinion was not in his favor. Today, Trump appears to be preoccupied with the situation in Gaza, claiming he has a good chance of negotiating a deal with Hamas for the release of hostages. This encapsulates the essence of foreign policy in the Trump era: announce potential agreements, delay their resolution, and if they don't materialize, simply move on and declare success regardless of the outcome. No one within Trump's administration seems motivated to address these issues, as doing so would imply acknowledging failures. Rebuilding the National Security Council with qualified individuals would mean admitting that their expertise was necessary from the start. Similarly, if Hegseth or other top officials were to resign, it would highlight the significant errors made in their appointments. Attempting to rein in policy freelancers and limit the influence of lower-level decision-makers would also indicate a loss of control by senior leaders. This administration has never been guided by a coherent foreign policy framework beyond Trump's vague "America first" rhetoric. As we approach the end of his second term, it's evident that the primary objectives of Trump's 2024 presidential campaign are to avoid imprisonment, seek retribution against his adversaries, and enable himself and his allies to profit in any way possible. The selection of appointees appears to have been driven more by their potential for shock value and trolling than by their qualifications. In contrast, the world's most powerful nations are led by experienced professionals, some of whom are adversaries of the United States and pose significant threats. While Undersecretary Colby may have some questionable ideas, Americans can only hope that he and the small group attempting to manage these complex issues are competent enough to navigate the challenges ahead. 2. Ukraine under fire. Pentagon cuts air defense as Russian drone attacks surge. The Pentagon's decision to halt crucial air defense support for Ukraine comes at a time when Russian drone attacks are surging dramatically, an alarming development that could have serious consequences for Ukraine's ability to defend itself. But here's where it gets controversial. While the number of Russian drone strikes has exploded, the U.S. is simultaneously pausing shipments of vital air defense systems, including the highly capable Patriot interceptors. According to the Institute for the Study of War, Russian drone attacks on Ukraine have surged by approximately 500% during June and July compared to earlier this year. This staggering increase has left Ukraine's defenses stretched thin. Fred Kagan, a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, emphasized the urgency, stating, "The Ukrainians are getting pounded at an unprecedented level of intensity. They need air defense of all sorts urgently." The scale of the recent attacks is unprecedented. On the night of July 3rd, Russia launched its largest drone and missile assault since the conflict began over 3 years ago, deploying more than 530 drones and at least 10 missiles, primarily targeting Kyiv, Ukraine's capital, according to the Ukrainian Air Force. Tragically, these attacks resulted in at least 2 fatalities and over 90 injuries nationwide, with the barrage continuing through July 7th. In just the past week, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy reported that Russia unleashed roughly 1,270 drones and 39 missiles against Ukraine. This sharp escalation coincides with the Pentagon's decision to pause certain weapons deliveries, including critical air defense systems like the Patriot missiles. Pentagon spokesperson Sean Parnell described this move as a capability review to ensure U.S. military aid aligns with our defense priorities. This pause has sparked strong criticism from Democratic lawmakers, who view Ukraine's air defense as the most pressing concern. Adam Smith, the leading Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee, called air defense the biggest concern, without question, following the Pentagon's halt on weapons shipments. He dismissed claims that the U.S. is running low on its own military stockpiles due to aid to Ukraine and Israel, stating, "Stockpiles that I've seen are no lower than they've been during the last 3.5 years since Russia's initial invasion." Smith expressed frustration, wondering if the Pentagon's decision stems from really unintelligent analysis of what our national security needs truly are, or if it's simply an excuse to let Putin have his way in Ukraine. Senators Jack Reed and Chris Coons, both senior Democrats on the Senate Armed Services Committee, echoed these concerns in a joint statement on July 3rd. They described the aid pause as the latest and most dramatic blow to our support for Ukraine, highlighting that the assistance, including essential air defense interceptors and artillery munitions, was approved by Congress and scheduled for delivery months ago. Importantly, this aid comes from contracts authorized by Congress and does not deplete U.S. stockpiles directly. Fred Kagan further explained the tactical implications of the drone onslaught, noting that concentrated Russian drone strikes facilitate ballistic missile attacks by overwhelming Ukraine's defenses. Without Patriot interceptors, Ukraine remains vulnerable to ballistic missiles, as Patriots are currently the only air defense system capable of intercepting such threats. A lack of Patriots leaves Ukraine open to the Russians just shooting their ballistic missiles whenever they want, Kagan warned. In recent days, both President Zelenskyy and former U.S. President Donald Trump have acknowledged Ukraine's urgent need for enhanced air defense, yet no concrete agreement has been reached. Zelenskyy mentioned in a July 5th video statement that he had an extremely fruitful conversation with the U.S. president about air defense. Trump appeared to agree, telling reporters aboard Air Force One the same day that Ukraine would require Patriots for defense, adding, "They're going to need something because they're being hit pretty hard." However, Trump also expressed dissatisfaction with a recent phone call he had with Russian President Vladimir Putin, saying, "He wants to go all the way, just keep killing people." It's worth recalling that Trump briefly halted all military aid to Ukraine in March after a tense Oval Office meeting with Zelenskyy devolved into a heated argument. This history adds another layer of complexity to the ongoing debate about U.S. support for Ukraine's defense. So what do you think? Is the Pentagon's pause on delivering key air defense systems a necessary strategic reassessment, or is it inadvertently, or even intentionally, handing Russia an advantage in this brutal conflict? Are we truly running low on stockpiles, or is this a political maneuver? Share your thoughts and join the conversation below. 3. Trump sending more weapons to Ukraine after aid pause. U.S. military aid update. In a stunning reversal that has left both allies and adversaries scrambling to understand the White House's next move, former President Donald Trump has declared his intention to send a new wave of weaponry to Ukraine. This announcement marks a dramatic U-turn, coming just 1 week after his administration triggered international alarm by pausing certain military shipments to the war-torn nation. Speaking before a dinner with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Trump was emphatic about the need for this policy shift. "We're going to send some more weapons. We have to. They have to be able to defend themselves," he stated, underscoring the urgency of the situation. "They're getting hit very hard. We're going to have to send more weapons. Defensive weapons, primarily, but they're getting hit very, very hard." The decision to resume and increase aid appears to be a direct consequence of a whirlwind week of diplomacy. Trump recently held separate phone calls with both Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. The conversation with Putin was described by Trump as disappointing, yielding no progress toward a ceasefire. In stark contrast, his discussion with Zelenskyy was hailed as exceptionally positive, with the Ukrainian leader calling it their best and most productive conversation to date. Following that call, Trump confirmed he was actively considering Ukraine's desperate pleas for more Patriot defense systems. But here's where the story gets more complex. The initial pause in aid last week was not a minor administrative hiccup. A senior White House official confirmed that the halt, which included critical air defense missiles, was a deliberate decision following a comprehensive review of military spending. This review, signed off by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, was officially framed by the White House as a move to put America's interests first. Behind the scenes, however, some U.S. officials suggested a different motivation. They hinted that the review was heavily influenced by a strategic pivot within the Pentagon, championed by Policy Chief Elbridge Colby, to prioritize readiness for a potential future conflict with China. In a statement at the time, Colby carefully balanced these competing priorities, noting the Department of Defense was examining how to support Ukraine while also preserving U.S. forces' readiness for administration defense priorities. This reveals the central and highly controversial tug-of-war shaping American foreign policy. Should the nation's resources be focused on countering an immediate, active war in Europe, or concerned to prepare for a potential superpower confrontation in the Pacific? This is a debate with profound implications for global stability, and there are strong arguments on both sides. Russia, for its part, had welcomed the temporary halt in aid, baselessly claiming it was because the United States was running out of weapons to give. That narrative has now been upended. Chief Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell affirmed the new direction on Monday, stating, "At President Trump's direction, the Department of Defense will send additional defensive weapons to Ukraine to ensure the Ukrainians can defend themselves while we work to secure a lasting peace." This entire episode unfolds against a backdrop of immense American contribution and growing concern. The U.S. has been, by far, the single largest military donor to Ukraine since Russia's 2022 invasion, providing everything from tanks to advanced rocket systems. This unprecedented level of support has led to legitimate worries about the depletion of America's own military stockpiles, a critical factor in its ability to respond to other global crises. And this isn't the first time we've seen such a sudden policy whiplash. Trump had previously frozen all military aid to Ukraine in March after a reported argument with President Zelenskyy, only to restore it about a week later. This pattern of rapid-fire changes has become a hallmark of his administration's approach to the conflict. The immediate trigger for Ukraine's recent pleas was a severe escalation in Russian aerial assaults. Just hours after Trump's disappointing call with Putin, Russia launched a record-breaking swarm of drones at Ukrainian cities, highlighting the country's vulnerability. Now, with Trump's renewed commitment and his pointed declaration that, "I'm not happy with President Putin at all," it seems those pleas have been heard. This latest development raises critical questions. Is this rapid policy reversal a sign of agile leadership responding effectively to a changing diplomatic landscape, or does it reflect an unpredictable and potentially unreliable foreign policy? We're interested to hear your take. Do you believe this decision strengthens America's position, or does the inconsistency itself create new risks? Share your thoughts in the comments below.